one item on the agenda, and that is the budget workshops. I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Bedell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't, Linda Quinley, are you on? Because I don't see Linda. I see that Veronica is on, but Linda is actually our lead.
Linda is on.
Huh?
I see Linda.
Why don't I see her?
I'm here.
Oh, you just got on. Okay, so
Yes.
I saw you down at the bottom. So before we get started, board, this is our annual Board of Directors budget workshop. It's where we go through and give you all an update based on what our plans are and what the budget building process looks like as we then continue to move forward with ultimately a community engagement aspect of it, and continue to work through with the board and the community on a budget that we could present to the board to take action on prior to, I think it has to be done by the last day of June, but prior to July 1. And so this is a typical process. We went through this last year. This board had just come on and had a chance to go through that process last year. So I know there's an element of familiarity that will come with this. We also know, as we get ready to talk about this budget, that there's a lot going on in terms of as we think about the future outcomes of what's going to happen with public school funding given this pandemic and the impact that it will have on us. And it will require that we have to the best of our ability, plan for a conservative budget, but still try to do everything we can to build on the things that we've already been able to do well and build on that momentum, but taper expectations around significant major initiatives that may require multiple years of investments when we know that probably the most difficult days are ahead of us over the next 2 to 3 years. So Linda, I just wanted to tee it up from there and then kind of put it over to you.
Thank you. I am going to share.
And Linda, I'm sorry, Linda, real quickly before we start, let's ask everybody to mute other than Linda. So if everybody would mute their microphones other than Linda.
Sounds much better, doesn't it? All right. Let me see if I can get my screen to where it looks. Are you seeing all the slides there, or?
Yes, it's not in presentation mode yet.
Okay. Why I'm having trouble getting it to presentation mode. Sorry.
You're good.
No, help me out here. I'm gonna move Rita up here in the corner.
Did you click that?
I did, but I didn't. Oh, from beginning.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm not getting anything.
And you click the one on the bottom. It thinks it's in presentation.
I know it does, but it's not. Oops. See, it is over here.
Oh, you're sharing the wrong screen.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Let me try this again. Sharing the wrong screen.
Yeah, so just do share screen again.
I did share the wrong screen.
There you go.
All right. Thank you. Okay. So as we get started, just a reminder, as Dr. Bedell said, this is our first opportunity to get very far into the weeds with our board on the work we've been doing internally as we prepare for this upcoming budget season. It really is a workshop. So we're going to 101 you a little bit. For some of you, you've done this many times. For most of you, you did this once where you got elected and then boom, it's time to approve a budget. So I don't even remember if we workshopped before or after board elections last year. So we're going to take you through this. And of course, since it's a workshop, stop, ask questions. The whole team's on the line so we can help. And I wanted to start there before we go through. We have Erin Thompson and Veronica Sarmiento on the line. They do the heavy lifting on the budget. And so they're going to be taking notes, noting your questions. If there are things that we need to research and get back to you on, we'll work on that together. But big thanks to them because they've been working with the departments and the schools and the cabinet, getting the heavy lifting work done, and they will continue to do that until we get a final document presented. So thank you, ladies. And then the cabinet, this is something we talk about off and on throughout the year, but particularly in the winter and spring months. And then the board and all the budget managers, who I don't see very many other folks on. I don't know that our other leaders are with us, but thanks to all of those people. So let's just start.
I'm sorry, Linda.
Nope.
I will say Jennifer Collier is out sick. So I
Yes.
did want to make sure that folks knew that. So she's
Yes.
excused.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do a couple of slides that Jennifer would have done, and we'll see if I can, as Jennifer said to me this afternoon, channel my inner Jennifer when I get there. So just a reminder from a timeline perspective, this is our workshop tonight, public hearing coming up on May 13th, and then May 27th. If all goes well, we'll be ready to bring a final document to you for consideration, and then we've reserved that June 24th date to meet final approval. As Dr. Bedell said, that it is the obligation of the board to have a budget adopted before June 30th. And just a reminder, if we don't do that, what happens is the current budget stays in place. So anything that would be approved in a new budget would not be able to continue until we finally, after the first of the year, we're able to get a budget done. But we feel confident we won't need to cross over July 1st. Starting with a slide you've seen so many times. Mr. Abarca shares it with you every time he does a treasurer's report. But just a reminder, as we're going to look a little bit into revenues, how important local revenue is to us. $215 million of the total budget, which is 80% of our total budget. So important for us to keep in mind as we go forward. Now you have a binder of documents. Those of you who are able to get by and get it. If you did not get that binder and there are some handouts that are definitely not in the slides. If you want it to look at, let us know and we can forward that to you while we're on this meeting. But I'm not going to go through every page that's in that binder. It's a culmination of a variety of works, but we're going to hit some of the highlights on these slides. But as you're looking through your binder, if there are questions, things you want to talk about that we're not necessarily addressing, please let us know. So local revenue highlights, that's the important place to start since this is 80% of our budget. Currently, as we talked before, there's $14 million being held as property taxes paid under protest while we are at budget for the year. If all were to be collected, our collection rate would go up to 90%, which is just below the norm for us. But we're really sitting only at about 82% collection rate right now. That's pretty low for this time of the year. So we've taken that into account when we consider what we're using for revenue projections next year. And also we've talked about it over the last weeks, months during the treasurer's report. Delinquent taxes continue to trail behind, and we're assuming that's going to continue. Probably just an important reminder, I was having a conversation with someone else yesterday and they said, well, shouldn't those tick up if your current stay down? People who pay under protest, even if it's a year from now when those protest monies come to us, they're considered current because they paid them on time. And so those would not roll into delinquent taxes, only the actual folks that literally paid the county late. And people who are behind right now have up to 3 years before they really get in trouble if it's real property. So we are assuming that it will not be this next year that delinquent taxes tick back up, that perhaps the year after that would be when that happens. Also, new construction, when we're thinking about where we are with our revenue projections for property taxes, there is still new construction happening and improvements happening. And normally all of that comes to us as first year revenue. So just naturally, even in a non-reassessment year, we tend to see increases in assessed valuation because of that. So in a non-reassessment year, you're going to be somewhere around that 1.5% mark, 2%. We are assuming flat local revenues next year because we believe the delinquents will continue to be behind, and we believe that those protests may take some time to resolve. So whatever gets resolved this year is really what we're using going forward for next year. So that's where we are really with property taxes right now. The other big line of local revenue is Proposition C, sales tax. And just as a reminder, it's a statewide sales tax for education. The state budget that was passed through the House just this afternoon and is getting ready to go to the Senate, I was able to get a peek at those adjustments after the Tuesday night House work. And they are estimating a decrease of about $15 per WADA, $14.5 million. And WADA's weighted average daily attendance. Probably most of you remember that. We're going to be a little more conservative right now, because when you think about the number of businesses that are closed, may or may not reopen, the sales tax decreases that we know are happening, and then as businesses come back online, even though the state of Missouri is opening next week, again, some will not reopen, but there will be this point in time that we're in, we know people will be more diligent about spending. And so we just have to assume that that sales tax line is going to be less. So we're being conservative here, going with a greater decrease than DESE is currently saying we should expect, or that the state budget is calling for. And that's going to be a reduction to our budget next year of about $1 million. That's where we are on it right now. There's certainly time between now and May 27th when we bring you a final document, but that's what we're using in the numbers we're showing you today. And the other line of local revenues that is a concern, several of you have asked about this during treasurer's reports the last couple of months, interest on our investments and our deposits. And again, we have a considerable amount of money that was collected this January, February that is slated out to mature during paydays between now and the end of January or mid-February, and those are locked in at fixed rates. But next January, when we get that next influx of property tax revenues, we will be investing that at significantly lower rates is probable right now. And so we're assuming a decrease to that last half of the year for that new revenue, and looking at that to be about $277,000 of decrease. Remember, you're allowed to ask as we go along. So.
Yeah, so Ms. Quinley, this is Nate. Quick question for you. So just purely from a local revenue perspective, what's your sum of decreases?
We're going to get to that in just a second.
Oh, sorry.
Unless I did not put that page in.
I haven't looked ahead, so.
Here. All right, now I'm confused about where I'm going. Yep. Give us just a couple slides.
Okay, sorry.
Now I've really got myself messed up, so hang on.
My bad.
Always messing stuff up, Nate.
I know, I can't help myself.
Go way back.
Yeah.
You should be on the slide that's state funding update.
So I actually put my slides in the wrong order, Mr. Hogan. So your question would have been right on, but we're gonna do them in the order I put them instead of the order I intended.
Okay.
All right. So the state funding update, again, as of last night, and the reductions that were made, they were pretty good to public education. We're pretty pleased with what we're seeing out there. Right now, they're showing $7.1 million reduction to the foundation formula, which is about $10 per WADA. There's around 920 to 940,000 of statewide weighted average daily attendance. So that's going to be a reduction of about $170,000 for us. When we get to the slide where we look at, or in your binder, you will see on page 2 that there's a blue line on basic formula. And just to kind of orient you on that document, over in columns E and F, there's one that says, how does this year's budget look compared to the current budget? And then how does next year's budget look compared to what we think this year is going to look like? And you'll see that that foundation formula line is really our largest negative adjustment. That is partially due to this reduction in the amount per WADA. but it is also reduced as we look at expected charter enrollment growth and KCPS's conservative projections of student enrollment that do not show growth, but in fact show a slight decrease. So I've snipped a little piece in here that I think you also have in those pages in that first tab that shows you, can you guys see my cursor? Nope.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, we can.
Great. All right. So here's this current year, 1920, and then in 2021, what we're looking at. So our finance team, Veronica specifically, who is our foundation formula guru, works with Jesse in planning to look at what we think these numbers will be. And I apologize, I see I snipped off a piece of information that was important. That top line, Aaron and Veronica, correct me if I'm wrong, that is our membership count, which means those are the people that we physically counted to be present during count days this year. So you see we are projecting that line to go down by about 87.4. And then we're projecting a little bit of increase in early childhood, assuming we make some additional classroom moves that we've already talked about internally into our operating budget. The second set of lines is the weighted average daily attendance for this WADA. So it takes into, or this membership, so it takes into account that attendance rate. And you see that decreases by about 98. This is the funding component right here after we've applied the attendance rate to it.
So, Ms. Quinley, quick question then on your membership numbers. So if I look at 2021 of 14,041 students, that is, as of 2/18/20, that was the actual count?
No, this was our count for this year. As of
I'm sorry, yeah, sorry, not 20, not 20.
Yeah, this is our projection for next year. Right.
Okay, so that was 14,128 actual students that were enrolled as of some period.
That were enrolled and attended during the 10-day count window. So you will hear enrollment numbers, and I, as a finance person, am a big fan of talking about membership versus enrollment. People know that it makes me crazy, but enrollment means I'm on the rolls. Membership means I'm on the rolls and I showed up during the 10-day count window. We have a count window in September and we have a count window in January. If I'm on the books but don't show up, DESE says we're not going to pay you for them.
Okay, and so is that 14,128 for the current school year? Is that the January count or is that the September count?
I believe it's the September count.
Okay, and so when I see data that suggests 15,000 plus kids, how is that different than the 14,128? I mean, or why, I guess, is it different?
Two components. The 15,000 plus, you're probably seeing that in the Friday update coming out of the enrollment office. Mm-hmm. And so those are kids that are on the roster. It doesn't mean they're showing up.
Gotcha.
And I believe that also includes our pre-K counts. And here I'm just doing K-12.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks for the clarity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good questions. Good questions. So then down in this bottom section, I apologize for this alignment here. This is, Veronica keeps some great little stats. I miss it, but I love nerding out when she shares her files with me. She keeps some great historical information on the important fact component, and this is really the largest driver of our revenue conversations. What will our WADA be plus the charters? Because remember, charters get paid the local revenue based on their counts. So the more students they have, the more local revenue they get. So again, if we look out here in these two current years, what we're seeing is that for payment purposes, so using this top number of membership times attendance factor, this year, it looks like it's going to be 33,452 total in the system, us plus charters. Of that, charter schools are 16,060, and we're 17,391. Based on the projection data from Jesse around charter enrollment and KCPS enrollment, and again, you have some of that information in the next few pages in your binder as you take the next few days to, I know, dig deep into it and read it. we're saying that the charter schools will move up from 16,060 to 16,521, an increase of about 460 pupils. And that the district will move downward about 338 for WADA purposes. When you get down here, you're getting a little more into the, there's typo in there. The actual counts where we're thinking will go down just under 100 children. So this is a component of the fact that currently WADA uses prior year high. So next year, I'm not going to do a very good job of this because I don't have this slide up visually, but you do have a page in your document. So this number right here, the way the state foundation formula works, you get to, it builds in protection factors for schools that have declining enrollment. So that if in September, all of a sudden you are 100 kids less than you were last year and you didn't see that coming, the foundation formula allows you to collect WADA based on the highest of this year or the 2 previous. And so while we're saying we're going to actually go down somewhere in this range next year, we're going to get to collect on the higher of the 2 previous. So it gives us a little time to gracefully move downward from a funding perspective. So the other component, and again, we'll look at some numbers in a minute. The other component on state revenue is, of course, they're making a reduction to transportation funding. This looks like finally it came in as 2 lines of transportation funding, one for 10 million and one for 7 million, I think. Yeah. So our decrease may be a little greater than this. It may be closer to the $40,000 mark, but it is not relatively significant to us. The really bad thing is we would have actually gained revenue on this line because of our improved efficiencies in transportation this year with the partnership of STA and our new director of transportation. They worked really hard to reduce the number of buses we had and reduce the total number of miles we are driving for to and from school. And that would have increased our revenues because there is an efficiency factor built into the state funding for transportation purposes. So we're disappointed to see this line go down because we did hope it would be actually be going up. So this is the slide that I put a little out of order. My apologies. This is your local revenue. And you see the blue lines are where we're looking at significant change. We're going to save this for a later slide and conversation. So here's our Prop C, where we're saying our projected actual to next year is going to be down about 1.1 million, budget to budget about $1 million. And earnings on deposits, we're going to be down from actual about $277,000 probably. Net zero projected actual on property tax, but compared to the budget, right around $5 million current budget. So budget to budget, we're going to look like revenues are going up because this is going up. Projected actual to budget, we're going to be about 1.5 million in decrease in local revenues. Does that get to your question, Mr. Hogan?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I did not put a slide in, but I want to quickly talk about the CARES Act funding because that is some additional funding. There are other lines of revenue that we're watching, of course. You know, one of the things we have to think about, and Dr. Bedell says it every time we're in a conversation, next year is not going to be like this year in many, many ways. And one way to think about that, from a revenue perspective, there are very few places that a school district can generate revenue. You generate revenue by having more children and better attendance. That's a revenue generator. You generate revenue by providing Medicaid eligible services to kids. If we start the school year or have portions of the school year that are virtual versus in person, we will have reduced Medicaid funding reimbursement because some of those services, while we can provide many of them digitally, there are some costs behind those services that you get to claim that would require a child to be present. For example, any day that a child receives Medicaid services, we're able to claim that day's cost of transportation via Medicaid and be reimbursed for the transportation cost. So there are lots of other lines that we'll be looking at. We're just really focusing on kind of the high points for you today. So under the CARES Act, that is a line that will come in similar to those numbers that I just showed you. Do not include things like Title I and IDEA, those federal grants. We're looking at that continued, sustainable, long-term, oops, man, I keep going the wrong direction. My apologies. I'm going to come back here. These are really those true operational revenues from a local perspective, and then this, and in your binder, the state and federal perspective that are ongoing because of operations. We do have a significant amount of other revenues from Title and special education and Title IV, those kinds of things that we're not talking about because they are driven based off of that federal continuation of budget. We don't really at this point have any reason to believe those are going to be reduced. But if they are reduced, they normally come with an exact offset of expenditures. So what you don't see on here is the addition that would come from the CARES Act money. So it's estimated to be somewhere, there's a couple of different numbers that we're playing with right now, but it's somewhere in the range of 80 to 90% of our current title allocation. So those additional dollars are going to be $8 to $9 million of additional revenue. Right now, our plan is to use those for some one-time expenditures because they're going to be one-time monies. It's not money that we would recommend go into salaries or into hiring new staff because, again, one-time money is best used for one-time expenditure. So our recommendation in the budget is going to be that we use that new revenue to purchase student devices. We'll be focusing on the 7 through 12 because they have 4 and 5-year-old devices that are not equipped for virtual education and in a very good manner. You'll see that at the next board meeting when we ask for permission to go ahead and get some of those on order. But additionally, with the large number of devices we've put out, we have to expect a larger number of devices not returned. So our recommendation is going to be to use that CARES Act money to purchase student devices and then to also allow the curriculum instruction department to acquire digital learning tools and media necessary to deliver instruction in a digital versus a textbook style format. That'll be the primary uses for those funds.
Ms. Quinley, quick question if I can.
Yep.
On your point specific to the percentage of devices that won't get returned, get shipped to California for all sorts of interesting uses, I'm sure.
Yeah.
One of the requests that we made from the last meeting we had on that topic was to be able to sort of quantify that. Mm-hmm. And then it would be I think really good to sort of understand what the plan is to start to mitigate some of those losses as well. Yeah, so Joe is on the line. We can have him speak to that, but we are anticipating about a 25% loss of device, and I can't tell you how that differs from our norm. We have tried to put some teeth into it this year. So Joe, can you share that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So like Linda said, we are expecting about a 25 to 30% loss or non-return of these items. That percentage also includes our damage rate that we're expecting. So typically on a given school year, 9 through 12 grade, or 12th graders are the ones who take them home, and we usually see about 20 to 25% from that grade level. The way the data trends is middle school is typically the hardest and worst with taking care of devices, and then elementary is actually better on the devices than any other grade level. Typically there's more parent involvement. So we took all those numbers into account to come up with this expectation of 25 to 30% loss. We did purchase a little over 1,000 refurbished models to help with that loss rate, as well as build in the loss rate to the Chromebook purchase that'll be coming to everybody at the next board meeting for approval.
And so how does that 5 to 10? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dr. Bedell.
No, I was just saying, in my conference calls with superintendents from the Council of Great City Schools, everybody, that's the common talk, is around 25% that people need to budget for a 25% loss, whether it's through things that can't be repaired at all, or for some odd reason we're not able to retrieve it back. So that number is pretty much on par with what you're seeing happening across the country as far as anticipated loss.
So that makes sense. I think one of the reason I even sort of brought the question up today is I got the sense from you, Joe, at the last meeting that we were going to start spinning around some ideas around how to either prevent those or work directly with parents to incent them to not allow the devices to sort of leave the home or the hands of their kids, et cetera. And so if you guys aren't concerned, I'm not concerned. I just, again, I bring it up because I want to understand whether or not we plan to mitigate it or incentivize parents to help us mitigate it or what.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do plan on mitigating it as much as possible. So we're looking at some policies, and we are taking into account the socioeconomic status of our students and what's possible with the idea that we do need buy-in and help from our parents and students in order to help with this challenge that we're having. So we're looking at what the best approach is from that. Other districts charge a technology fee or insurance, and then they charge for damages, or they have a scaling model for the number of times that something is damaged, or they will charge full price for the device that's not turned back in. So we're looking at all of those things. Another thing that we're doing to help mitigate is we have accidental damage protection on all of our devices. So if we get them back damaged, to get it fixed is already included in the purchase price for 3 years. So that helps us mitigate those damages. It's really the loss. And at my last district, we were looking at about $500,000 a year in just damages before we put these mitigations in place, and then we really got that down to under $100,000 a year in damages and lost and stolen.
So Joe, can we, so that we can keep going with the budget discussion, when the administration, Dr. Bedell, brings forward recommendations, can we hear a little bit more, if you're not ready at that point, but at some near-term point prior to our school year beginning, to hear a little bit more about this, because this is a major investment the board approves, and just so we can understand better how we're going to execute that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep rolling. We're on a pretty good pace here, but I imagine that'll slow down. As you look into your binders, page 7 shows the tier model that was built a couple of years ago. We're going into our 3rd year and of using this model. It was modified a little bit last year. I don't think a whole lot this year. Dr. Shepard can help us with that if you have some questions about it. But take a look at that page 7, and then you'll see by tier. If I'm a tier 3 school, so a school with higher needs and performance challenges, the focus on additional resources by tier that we get. And then Aaron and Veronica put together this grid just to give us a visual of the financial investment by tier, to show that we really are putting resources into tier 3 at a higher level than tier 2 and at a higher level than tier 1. There are a couple of ways that we do this. The first is in what we refer to as the equity budget, which is the additional resources that align back to this tiering model that are provided by the district. The federal budget, that's going to largely be use of title dollars or comprehensive school dollars, SIG dollars, those kinds of things, where a school will have the opportunity to buy up some services. And so you can see, again, by tier, you're going to expect to see that this federal budget is quite a bit higher in tier 3. Those are charter schools, high needs title schools, and then some still title schools. You're going to have some title money in here, but not nearly as much in our tier 1 schools. So we wanted to look at an example. There it is. Got those slides backward too, I guess. So here's the tiering, so that you can see in a tier 3 school what we want to make sure you have. Maybe I'm a small school and typically I wouldn't have a vice principal, but if I'm a tier 3 school, we want to make sure that principal is in the classroom, working with teachers, interacting with them, evaluating them, helping them, mentoring them. And so they're going to need a second set of hands to take care of all the other things that go on in a principal's life in a school building. And then you can see these other kinds of resources. And this board supported this model when we came in and gave us additional dollars to be able to put a lot of this into place. That continues with little, we are not really asking for adjustment to that this year, but leaving the plan in place to allow it to keep working. And here's, you have Ms. Thompson and her team and Dr. Shepard and her school leadership, her assistant superintendents have worked over the last couple of months, then with HR as well, diligently by building, looking at what their staffing model should look like. And so this is just a sample page. I chose one that was a tier 3. So just to kind of orient you to it so that later after the call, you can go and look school by school and provide us questions if you have them. So we can see this is Longfellow Elementary. On this side is their current staffing or additional allocations. So you see one principal and using her equity dollars, because she's a tier 3 school, she was able to buy up a vice principal that she normally would not have. In the top right center, when you're looking at your printout, in the top right of the page, you're going to see that projected enrollment. So your first page 8 is Hale Cook, and it shows a projected enrollment of 316. You can flip through these, and you'll see that a tier 1 school with the same enrollment as a tier 3 school is going to be very different in its staffing model. So just going down through here, you're able to see the kinds of staffing that and where they came from. If they came from the federal dollars or the equity staffing, and then in total. Then when you come across to this side of the page, this is next year's allocation. And you see where it goes up or down. And this up or down, again, Dr. Shepard, I might ask you to
I'm going to jump in.
Okay.
On Longfellow, they should have had a VP, but the principal decided that she wanted to buy 2 teachers with that money. So that's how we negotiate with the principals. They do all the input. So instead of on that tier 3 school, you see that she would get a VP. She decided that she wanted the classroom teachers instead of the VP.
Yeah. Well, and she decided she wanted a behavior specialist. She was going to get a part-time VP based on the fact that her enrollment had dropped so much, but she chose to get that full-time behavior specialist right there, which she did not have last year.
And remember, she was going to be reduced by at least 4 to 5 teachers because her enrollment has dropped so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Can I
and
ask
all of them get a chance to, they all get a chance to come to their staffing meeting and negotiate. I prefer this over this, or I'd like more of this and less of this. And we generally allow them to make those decisions.
When it comes to schools that are on the cusp of one tier or the other, in those transition years, does that equity staff drop off?
Well, this is only the second year that we've had it in place. And so we haven't even, once we re-tier them, I'm sure there will be a need for us to consider that. But this is not a good year for us to re-tier when we don't have data. But we will need to begin looking at what is the transition when you're moving from a tier 2 to a tier 1, or when you're moving from a tier 3 to a tier 2. And the hope is that everybody is, moving in the right direction. And if everybody's moving, then the tiers remain the same, because there's always going to be a tier 2, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, just based on how the data falls. Now, it may shuffle some. And when it shuffles, I think we do need to consider how is it that we make the adjustments so that it's not just a quick fall off, but there's a gradual. And campuses have money that they can actually choose to utilize to keep some of the things that maybe we at one time did purchase or pay for.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking from a budgeting standpoint, I would hate to disincentivize transitioning from a lower tier to an upper tier. by losing funding for something that would otherwise have helped it. So that's what I'm trying to track there.
And this is Marvia. I did have a question. I guess I inarticulately wrote it in the chat. I'm going to rephrase it now. But to what extent does budgeting play when we're thinking about how we put, or does it come into play when we're thinking about how do we put the most experienced or most tenured or the most highly rated teachers at these tier 3 schools? Is that something that we're also doing with this equity budgeting, or is that something that's farther down the road that you're considering?
I would like to answer that one. That's part of the piece that I had shared with you all early in the year as a part of our legislative agenda, where I said, we need to be able to figure out how can we get, experienced people that have some tenure to work in our schools that needed more. And we were wanting to be able to try to figure out how we could offer differential pay if you're working at a tier 3 school. And I think that's something that we were able to come to an agreement on with our union, that, these schools are designated as comprehensive schools or in the bottom 5% according to ESSA guidelines, that, we felt that we could work around that. The issue was trying to get statute moved so that we would be able to do something like that, because we're not allowed at this point statute-wise to do what you're asking, Marvia, but that is what we're fighting for.
Okay, so I'm just trying, thank you, that makes sense. So right now, like if a teacher comes on board, they let's say you hire them, what decide where it's like, so do they get to pick where they go, or I guess I'm trying to understand, like, so it's not like you got central office doesn't just assign them to us, is that?
No.
Go ahead, Molly, you can answer that.
No, what happens is our Monica Landis, who is she works in human resources, she may send out eligible candidates to schools, and they'll actually interview the candidates. What you'll find sometimes is that some candidates may interview with 2 or 3 schools, and so they will make their decision as to where they want to go. We don't assign them, although we do send, the HR does send out viable candidates to schools for them to interview.
Thank you.
Great questions. So as you take time and look through these, this is a really fabulous tool. We worked hard to develop this a couple of years ago. Dr. Shepard had a vision of what she wanted to do, worked really closely with financing, and I couldn't be happier with this tool. This is the kind of information that most boards of education are going to have access to, and it's a tool that lets us track historical movements. And so I'm really proud of this, happy to show it to you as a part of our process. And I wanted to just make a note on Longfellow as you're working through them. As Ms. Thompson noted, we're looking at a smaller enrollment for Longfellow based on our projections. We hope those projections are wrong, but believe that they're probably pretty close. Of 154 students, if you turn to that page 18, you'll see that in the top right corner. That 154 students divided by 10 classroom teachers is a really nice class size. And so they have a tool that they use during this process too that says, what should my class size be based on the DESE standards? And we meet or exceed that in almost every case. Where we run into challenges always relates to the mobility of our students. So we might start off just right in this building, but then in September, October, they get 15 more kids, and now we're over our desired. But school leadership works closely with HR to try to make whatever adjustments we can, but we do know this remains imperfect as we work through it. I wanted to make a note down here on the bottom too. This is where they track, what did she do? So she should have had 1 VP, but she traded up for a plus resident. And then as Dr. Shepard noted, that behavior ISS support person. So again, showing the flexibility that a principal has to request to use their monies the way they see most important for their students. Any other question on the tiered model before we move past it?
There's no questions, Linda, but I just want to make the small point. This is Jennifer, sorry. You used the word flexibility. To me, this is a perfect example of the balanced autonomy between the school level and the district level. And that word, autonomy, I noticed has been in some of the more recent research reports that we've gotten. And so this to me is a great example of how our district tries to allow for some principal autonomy, but with a little bit of a framework to work within. So just a comment.
Yeah, Ms. Wolfsey, you're correct about that. And part of it is, while we are not a decentralized school district, we are a centralized school district. And generally in a centralized school district, a lot of what tends to happen from a staffing standpoint is, this is pretty much what you get, and here's the people you get. In a decentralized model, it allows for us to be more discretionary. That's the reason why we set this up, where we would allow for principals to come in and they need to defend. You can't just say, I want these things. You need to defend why you think the positions you're asking for are going to be beneficial to you based on data. And that allows for ultimately principals to have that autonomy. I will not sit here and say to anybody listening that do they get what they want 100% of the time? No, because sometimes the data just doesn't justify that particular position. But we do bring everybody in and give everybody a voice. And I would tell you, probably 95 to 98% of the time, these principals can tell you, I have gotten what I've asked for, and I have received that support. The final thing, Rita asked a question, Ms. Cortez, and let's make sure that we get this to her, because I do remember this being asked before, and I don't know how we missed it. The question was around what was the current year-to-date enrollment at the time that we had gone on the spring break. So let's please make sure that we get that information to her, to the board, so that they can see where we were at the stop of the year, that gives us that total amount of enrollment after that January enroll count day. So thank you.
Yeah, we will do that. I actually was checking in with Jerome Williams from our assessment department last week, because unfortunately, one of the advantages of COVID is, and since we know the school year's not going to be, kids in seats the rest of this year, they have the opportunity to start working early on what our attendance percentage will be and some things like that. So they have started pulling that, and I asked for the number of kids present that week before school went out. So they've got some good active information, made a note of it. We'll make sure we get that in the Friday update. Other questions while we're sitting here before we move forward?
I have one quick question. Will this represent year 3 of implementing the tiered equity staffing model?
Yes, it will. We will be going into year 3.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Shepard, she's looking to get student performance data. That's our best tool to measure the effectiveness of this work. So we are really disappointed that we're not going to have that for this coming year. But the year after that, 3 years a really good mark to do it. So, hopefully we get to a point where.
Linda, may I interject for just a second?
Yes, please.
The model is built not just on student performance data, but it's built on things like the percent of special needs kids at the school, the percent of ELL students at the school, the percent of special ed kids who actually take the regular assessment versus the altered assessment. So the model, I think, I like it because it's pretty balanced between performance and then just factors that we know cause a school to need more. If I have more children who are beginner ESL students, then yes, I'm probably going to need a little bit more support in that area. And we've adjusted all of our funding models like this. We do our special ed like this, and we also do our ELL. If you have more of a certain type of kid, then we take that into account. And so, although we are getting performance data next year, performance data is only half of it. all of the other factors account for the other half.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Shepard. See, it really does take all of us to do this, as you can tell. Next, I wanted to real quickly just, again, put up this slide that you see every month. When you combine benefits and salaries, you get that we're spending about $180 million of our budget on that key component, which is the people that are doing the work. So almost 70% of our total budget goes towards salaries, and that's an important thing to think about, and one of the reasons that we wanted to transition now into salary schedules and costs of steps and give you just a little bit of reminder on how that works for us, because it is the largest component of our operating budget. So just this is for my friends who, like me, were surprised when they came into education to see a salary schedule. I had never seen one in my life until about 15 years ago when I came into the public ed world. It's something I think kind of specific to public education and maybe some state agencies and things like that. But public schools use salary schedules rather than salary ranges for the most part. Steps is a term we use. Steps are given for experience both when hiring and then annually, if the budget's allowed, to recognize your experience. So if I'm a new teacher applying for a job here and I've been teaching in another school district for 5 years, I don't come in on step 1 of the salary schedule. I get credit for that outside experience. And then, so I come in and I had my 5 years, I'm going to get credit for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to start on step 6. And then at the end of that first year, if the board directs so in the budget and the CBA aligns, then I get a step and I move to step 7. And so that's just sort of how that works. When you're looking at our salary schedules, and you have some examples in your binder starting on page 41, to make a salary schedule better outside of a step is a common practice when budgets allow, and you can do that basically in one of 3 ways. You can increase the starting rate of pay, you can increase the ending rate of pay, you can increase the value of steps. So steps tend to run off of a, I say index. People use a lot of terms for it, but a lot of times step 3 is a certain percentage of step 1. So maybe it's 1.062%, and that's 2% per step or something like that. You can make that 3% per step and increase the annual raise. You can add steps to say, we've been ending this salary schedule at 20 years, but we want to give raises through 25 years. And my personal perception of salary schedules is that they show you by category what an organization values. So a teacher salary schedule is going to be better, is going to pay higher rates of pay as you move across, which is for your education. You maybe get a master's degree, get an ed specialist, get a doctorate, and then they show appreciation for experience by giving you more going down. There are also lots of other important pieces of conversation around how a salary schedule is built. But as we come into this conversation, we wanted to remind you that we do negotiate most of our salary schedules with either AFT or SEIU. We're actively doing that right now with AFT. So we are not bringing you a salary proposal, but just wanted to get your head back around how they work and some of the things that we consider as administratively we think about our recommendations for salaries. So again, we're not ready to say, here's where we think we need to be yet, simply because we need to walk this process with our unions. So this is a summary of a few schedules, the ones that have been specifically worked through. And then down here, we're going to talk about the total. But these are the schedules that you have in your books for these employee groups and the kind of information that you'll see on them. And we'll throw a couple up on the screen just to make sure we understand it. How many people are affected by this schedule? That's a very important component. What's the annual cost of this schedule this year? What would it be next year if we give a step? So everyone who's here today was here all year, and they get to move down one line on the schedule to get their credit for this year's experience. What's the cost of that step? And on average, how much is that increase for each person on the salary schedule? And then, of course, we want to add benefits to that cost. we're estimating, Aaron worked this up for me, we're estimating that when we get through all of these schedules, again, this is just a portion of them at almost 2,000 of our employees, that the cost of a step is roughly 2.7 or $3.3 million once we have benefits added. And that on average, it's somewhere around 2.25%. I threw this in just because I think it's always important to note. People say, you know, is that your COLA adjustment? Is it your adjustment for performance? And it's sort of a combination of both. But just for perspective, 1.6 was the 2020 COLA that Social Security Administration noted. So our step is slightly higher than the current year's COLA. So let's look at a schedule and get our heads around it. Paraprofessionals and teaching assistants. On this schedule, I'm going to take you a little in the weeds here just for a second, but I'll get back out of them quickly. Just to give you something to look at when you're flipping through these. You can see that education matters on this schedule. So if I am an instructional para or a teaching assistant in a regular education classroom setting, and I have 0 to 89 hours of college credit, I'm going to get paid in this column, and then 90 to 119 here. And if I have a bachelor's degree, I'm going to get paid in this column. So because these folks are working in the classroom instructionally with teachers, education matters, and we want to reward that and encourage that by how our salary schedule works. 2 years ago, when we were negotiating with AFT, they asked us to specifically look at our ELL paraprofessionals because they not only do they support in the classroom, but they get asked to support outside of the classroom with translation and helping kids move a document that's in English over to their language in an understandable manner so they can use it. And so this column was added just 2 years ago in order to give some credit for that additional level of work. So you'll see a bachelor's degree para in the regular classroom starts at $1,462, whereas if they're going to serve in ELL, they're going to start at $1,491. And then our exceptional eds paraprofessionals are even higher at $1,520. And these oftentimes are one-on-one paras who are working directly with a single child or their classroom para. This schedule has 20 steps on it, so for up to 20 years, you have an opportunity for a raise unless the schedule is modified in some fashion. Other piece of data that we look at by schedule as we get ready to do this work this time of the year is we want to know where our employees sit on that salary schedule, because that helps you focus where you may need improvement inside the schedule. What is that telling you about our workforce and all sorts of things? So when we look at what I call the distribution chart for the paraprofessional schedule, you can see that we have 49 paras as of the date we pulled this information, which was March 15th, who were regular classroom paras with less than 89 hours of education, and 46 of them with bachelor's degree. That's a really impressive high number. So kudos to the hiring staff who are able to get us some degreed folks taking those paraprofessional positions. You can see that the majority of them are sitting in year 16 in this group of employees. And then as you go across the bottom, you can just see the total by column. So our highest number of paraprofessionals is both regular education and special education, with, again, a good number of people with bachelor's degree in all three categories. So this schedule has a total of 218 people on it as of the date we pulled it. You can see when you go down the right side here where the majority of them sit. Look at that, cell 16. And I'll tell you the reason that is because the same year, maybe last year when we were working on this schedule with AFT, we had added the ELL columns in the previous year, and then last year, this schedule used to cap out at 16 years or 15 years. I think it was 15 years. And so last year we said, you know what, we want to hang on to these long-term paras. They're very, very valuable. Let's give them steps all the way down to year 20 in order to stay competitive and keep them out there. So this is a good sign. We don't have very many people in the bottom of this schedule. This very bottom line, the reason that it has this beige color on it is because if I'm sitting on that schedule A step does me no good. I have hit the max for my salary schedule that I'm on. And when we give steps for experience, the people in this bottom row do not get anything. If we give steps for experience and go back to that first slide and improve the schedule in some fashion, then odds are the people in this bottom row are going to receive some financial benefit from that.
Linda,
So
may I ask a quick question about this, just so I can understand? It's interesting that you have 62 individuals who are on step 16, so in essence at the highest level. And so that's kind of rewarding that longevity. Does that also signal to you, though, that these are individuals who could potentially, I'm not sure where those individuals are, you know, in their career or age or retirement path? And so does that signal something to you about where you might see some shifts in the next year or two?
It does signal that. It's also probably a sign of the amount of experience that I'm given. So let's say that it's a sign of two things. So don't let me forget the second thing. Let's say that I was a para who came in to work for us and I had had 10 years of classroom experience, but now I want to be a para. This is where we definitely need Dr. Collier. It may be that if I'm going to go onto the para salary schedule and I've been a classroom teacher, I might get a little extra experience for the fact that I've been a classroom teacher. I can't tell you that for sure. That's a Dr. Collier question. But one of the reasons that there are so many people on this line, on line 16, is because last year they were on 15. And this had been a 15-column schedule for a very long time. So these people moved down year after year after year after year. So the people on this line, there are probably some of them who have 16 years of experience. There are probably some of them with 18, 19, and 20 years of experience. But because these rows were not there, they couldn't move forward in those years when they had basically hit the cap. But I think it does also show you that we have a good amount of experience in our para pool.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. So then additional information we put on this summary page, just as we're working with bargaining teams to have the conversation, is where does this column start and end? Again, you can see that by looking at the salary schedule, but it's nice to see it all on one page. And then just some summary information, because it's important to know, if I'm a paraprofessional, what's the average annual pay? A reminder, you can see up here, these folks are paid for 205 days. They work, I believe, the same number of days of teachers, but then get some paid holidays in addition to that. And then what is their average wage going to be next year when we give them a step? That's $690 increase, or 2.57% for our paraprofessionals. And again, the cost by schedule that you saw on that front summary. All right, so we've had our how does the salary schedule work? Dr. Collier and I, so this is where I'm going to try to channel my best Dr. Collier, so cabinet chime in and help me when I need it. The teacher salary schedule is, of course, the largest schedule in the system, the one with the largest number of people and the one closest to the classroom impacting students. You can see we have 6 columns in our salary schedule. I've seen salary schedules with 10 columns, and I've seen salary schedules with 3. In fact, I think Dr. Bedell is more accustomed to a 3 to 4 column schedule. Is that right, Dr. Bedell?
That is correct. What I'm accustomed to is bachelor's, master's, EDS, educational specialist degree, and doctoral degree.
Yeah, not uncommon, and really kind of those key columns that you want to encourage teachers to get to. So, theory behind a salary schedule. I want to encourage you to move across and get those higher degrees, continue your learning, and I want to encourage you to stay with us. So you should see that it's, I want my people to move across the salary schedule something like this. So by about year 10, I'm really hoping you've gotten that master's degree, and then I'm going to give you a little more time before you get down here into the doctorate degree. These gray lines that you see on here, that's the highest level as per our collective bargaining agreement of experience that teachers can bring in from the outside. So if I have taught in the Missouri or Kansas system for 25 years and retired from there, and I want to come to KCPS, I'm not going to come in down here at step 25. I'm going to come in based on my education at either step 11 or step 15. So that's what those are.
Ms. Quinley, sorry, I'm just curious. That one caught me off guard. What's the logic behind that?
You know, that again is it's a different for private sector people. You know, if you went to work somewhere today, you would not want to be capped on your experience, right? And in the private sector, you would not be. But it is highly standard in public education that I've seen, probably largely driven by that negotiation process to work on that people don't come in at higher levels than the people who have been in our system for some period of time.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. I was just curious.
Yep. You'll see down here in years 18 through 25 in this column that there are no more increases if I'm inside this column. So really we've said if you've gotten to year 18 and you have a bachelor's degree, we really want you to have moved across. And then that happens here as well 1 year later. But in the master's through doctorate or master's 60 columns, raises continue to be available throughout. Again, this schedule is a product of many years of negotiation and not always exactly how you see it, but the schedule that has been in place for us for some time now. Last year, with the help of the Board of Education, we worked hard on this number because we were the bottom in the market on starting wage. And this is what Dr. Collier would tell you, is they struggle to hire. When you look at our salary schedule, and we'll look at another chart in a minute that will show you better, we do really well down here in the end. But if I'm fresh out of college and I'm paying student loans back and I bought a car because I'm a college grad and I deserve one and I need to pay rent and I'm required to pay 9% retirement that someday I'll be thankful for, but today I don't think I can afford, where you start really matters when we hire. And Dr. Collier would tell you that we do struggle to hire, and we'll look at those comps in a minute.
Linda, love your logic behind all that, by the way.
Well, thank you. I'm channeling my inner Dr. Collier. And I love playing with salary schedules. So this is that distribution chart, similar to the ones we looked at pairs, but for our teachers. And notice this is an accumulation of teachers, librarians, counselors, and process coordinators. There are different days of pay for each of these, and you'll see that in your book as you take time to look through the teacher schedules. And so if I'm a librarian, I have a few more days than a regular classroom teacher, true for a counselor, true for a process coordinator. And so this is all of them. We have about 1,150 teachers that were on as of the day we pulled this. And again, you get to see where they sit. So the largest number of our teachers do have a master's degree, with 380 of them in that column. And then the second largest, very close amount, have bachelor's degrees. Again, you see that we have smaller numbers that have moved all the way across the schedule, but collectively here, you've got 340 to 50 teachers that have gone beyond their master's degree. And each year they have the opportunity to provide HR with evidence of that education. And so it could be that I'm a teacher, you go back a page, I'm a teacher who is here this year and I'm at 46,504 and I'm going to get a step for experience, but I also finished my master's. That means I'm going to go from 46,504 to 49,063. So there's my reward for getting that master's degree completed and getting evidence of that to HR. So you can see here, the majority of our teachers are in year 1 and 2 and in year 25 on the salary schedule. The schedule caps out at 25. So this is where we have the bulk of our teachers. Very interestingly, and a common conversation that we have in this mid-range, we tend to lose. We tend to drop off and lose people. And part of that is about where the salary schedule is, among other things, of course. But we want to see this kind of be continuous down through here. We want to get people in and we want to keep them in. The fact that year 3 and 4 are so many less than 1 and 2 is a sign that we tend to lose teachers after year 1 or 2 for a variety of reasons. One of them might be pay. So additional summary on this, when you look at our, for the 185-day teachers, what our average salary is, what it becomes with a step, and that increase is about $1,200 on average for 2.28%. Just a little more summary information for you here about where they sit on that salary schedule by count and percentage. Again, when you look at 10 years or less, you're going to be at well over 50% of our teachers at 10 years or less. And with this beige cluster that we saw back here, 31% of our teachers sit right here on the salary schedule, meaning 1 to 5 years of experience or less and master's degree or less. So this is a portion of our salary schedule that impacts the largest number of people if we were to work on improving the salary schedule with AFT this year. So we think that's just an important data factor when we look at the salary schedule. All right, another piece of data that we collect when we're looking at salary schedules, we try to do this on all of them. Some of them are a little more difficult to do because a lot of schools, when you look at their salary schedule, it says support staff, where we might have paraprofessionals broken out from other groups. So it gets harder when you get outside of teachers, but teachers are really nice to get good comparison data on. We use this when we have conversations about what we'd like to see in our salary schedules, and we use it when we have conversations with the unions as well. But this is the current year salary schedule for some districts around the area. KCK is the one that Dr. Collier would tell you we really run into trouble with. We make them an offer and KCK makes them an offer. Guess where they go? 9 times out of 10, they go to KCK because in Kansas, in addition to the salary schedule, they're able to give them a signing bonus. In the state of Missouri, bonusing is against the law in public education. So we just simply cannot compete with that.
All right. Thank you, Linda, for covering that. Good.
I know that's important to you, Dr. Bedell. So just looking at starting pay and ending pay. This is for the first step on the salary schedule based on education. And I said ish here because some it's bachelor's plus 12, bachelor's 16. Ours is bachelor's 15, master's 34. So ish is what I used there. But you can see that Hickman Mills has the lowest starting pay, I think, in pretty much every category. And then for the top line, we run across here. So with our increase last year, we got just past the middle of the pack for our starting teachers with a bachelor's degree. Still behind Independence, North Kansas City, and Kansas City, Kansas. Slightly above the average. In every other one of our starting pay categories, we are below the average and then slide back to where we're in position 2 or 3 commonly for starting pay for our teachers. Just the opposite when you look at the top of the scale. You see that a bachelor's degree teacher in that 25-year mark, while they're capped out for increases, they're making significantly more than our average counterparts around the area. And that's true in every one of these categories for top of the scale. And just when we're looking at schedule design and what it should look like and thinking about the cost of it, spread from top to bottom. So we'll look at ours because we're more interested in ours. If I'm a teacher in a bachelor's column and I stay there my entire career, during that 24 years of movement, I have the opportunity to go from $39,350 to $65,221, or the opportunity for $20,000 additional during that career time. And you can see that then when I get down into these bigger columns, as a doctorate candidate, I can move from $44,110 to $85,000, or have a $41,000 increase opportunity during my career time. And odds are I started here and ended here, and so I've more than doubled my salary during that time period. And you want that to be somewhat the pattern. Then down here, what are the average increases? So on average, if the district gives me a step every year, what will that average increase look like? And I try to say this when they look at how good North Kansas City pays to start and KCK to start. Again, hard to sell to a young kid just out of school. But look at these average raises. They're not very much in either case. In fact, these are really dismal. But what they've done is they've moved their money to the top of the schedule instead of the bottom of the schedule. And I have a personal theory on that. And I believe that's a better way to build a schedule, because if I start you higher, you're going to make more over your lifetime than if I have you wait 10 to 15 years to get to a good living wage. So I think that's a nicely built schedule when I'm able to drive more money to you earlier. But in our case, you can see that our average steps are always more valuable. And again, that's just a component of the design of our salary schedule. So when we go back here to this information where an average step is about 2.2, that's pretty high. You'll see that tend to be more like 1.2 or 1.4. So the values of our steps are competitive and that's on all of our schedules.
So Ms. Quinley, I mean, I'm sure this is an oversimplification of the thought process, but why not just simply flip it, right? It makes you more competitive with all of your peers in our market. But I'm guessing the union wouldn't look at that through the same lens.
Yeah, so that's part of the conversation. Everyone wants to be recognized for their contribution and their commitment. Transitioning into that conversation of, but if I pay you more earlier, I'm going to pay you more over your lifetime. That's a conversation that's a good one to have, and we have it. But historically, for many, many years, the focus has been on making sure these raises come. And I'm like you. What I would love to do is I'd love to see us shorten this schedule to 20 years, bring this bottom up to here, and divide this money up among these years, right? And make that even better. That would let us start higher. If I shove this schedule up about 5 years, I can start a lot higher on this top cell. But again, part of our conversation with the unions.
May I ask a question that I don't know, Ms. Quinley, if you can answer? Jennifer Collier certainly would be able to, but perhaps Dr. Bedell, given that we are paying, the starting base salary may not be higher, but the value of our steps and the increases that they get in those years is it higher than some of these other districts? How do we use that in our recruitment?
I actually had Monica Landis has come to me the last few years and said, help me with how to talk to these new teachers, because we know it's true. If you stay with us, you're going to be rewarded, right? And we're going to continue to reward you for some time. So they can get that conversation to work maybe one time out of 10, because again, people live on what they take home. And if I don't think I can afford that rent, it's not going to matter to me, because I think maybe in year 4, when you catch up to my school, maybe I'll come over then, right? Or maybe I won't, because I really love it and I get ingrained in the community, and then I don't. So I think we're in agreement with AFT that these numbers need to be higher. The challenge is, how do we get there, particularly when you consider the cost, just the cost, remember, of operating steps for all of our employees when we're in a relatively flat revenue environment is $3.3 million. So improving a salary schedule where you want to work on it, and we know AFT wants to work with us on that, but improving it comes with additional dollars. So an important part of our continued work with both of our unions this year to see if we can afford any kind of movement outside of steps, and if we can, what would it be? But that attracting and retaining employees, it's not all about money, but it's about money. And
yeah, you're right. And for me, we need to be very intentional to be more competitive at the very beginning of these individual careers. I started teaching in 2000, was my first full year after doing a substitute stint for a full year. And that salary was in 2000, $33,750, right? So we're talking about looking at this salary schedule in 20 years later. It's a $6,000 difference. That's just unacceptable. I mean, I don't, that's the stuff that I'm saying, okay, so then let's be very intentional, because it looks like when you look at this salary scale, the focus has been on let's make sure that the people with experience, that we make sure that the pay raises happen there. So that means that if we are able to add some additional, and like you said, it sounds like in negotiations, it's something that our union wants to work on, then it may be, everybody's, able to get that COLA pay raise or their step pay raise. But as far as if we got extra money, the focus needs to be in these first couple of years. And that's what gets the attention, so that we can be more competitive with other people as we're trying to recruit and compete. And then I think it helps us later on down the line to say, by you staying with us, here's where the benefits come, right? Getting over that hump of just learning how to be a teacher those first 3 to 5 years, it starts to really pay dividends, and then your experience grows, and we will ultimately see, just a better product because of the type of experience that we have, and teachers feeling valued and happy that, this is paying off. So yeah, that needs to be the focus. And then that becomes a part of our marketing package, because like I said, last year, we started the year off with only 7 vacancies. Our issue is then making sure that we keep people once we get them in. So, I almost feel like our recruitment is pretty good. It's making sure that we retain these people and keep them with us, and making sure that we are able to attract people who will be a fit, because a lot of this in working in this school district is about a fit too. It's a different assignment here. And I think everybody can agree with that. That's in on this call.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So I think one of the things that's really important, while we know by comparison that we get to some really great points here, it's short-minded of me to miss and to skip. I did not do what I like to do, which is on this bottom row, really call attention to how many people we have. 117, our largest single line of people who are not positively impacted by a step on the salary schedule. And again, they're sitting at some really competitive rates of pay at this point, but everybody feels better when they get a little something. So I didn't want to not note specifically that we do have a large number of people who receive nothing on the teacher salary schedule if a step is the only improvement to that schedule. So, and now I'm going backwards. As we've spent a lot of time on compensation, and we did that because it's the largest single component of our budget. And in years where you have, where you're projecting less than desired increases in revenues, I know it's the goal of every superintendent that I've ever worked with and every board of education to make sure that teachers are paid at the right and best level, and not giving steps for experience is one of the last things that we're ever going to want to recommend to you. So we wanted to focus on how this works, just to make sure as we go into these next few weeks of conversation with you, that salary remains an important piece of our conversation. Any other questions on salary? All right. So the final piece of information that we wanted to talk about tonight was the Capital Projects Fund. And Capital Projects Fund, by DESE definition, adds into the Incidental and Teachers Fund to be overall general, the operating budget. But it does have very distinct and separate rules behind it that are really important for us to remember. And as we know, it's an important part of the conversation about the long-term future of sustainability of our buildings and needs of our buildings and all sorts of things. So just wanted to spend a little bit of time on it. And I just ripped this right out of the DESE accounting manual, which is such a great read if you ever really, depending on how long you're stuck at home. But the Capital Projects Fund per DESE, it tells us exactly what we can use this fund for. It also tells us what we cannot use it for. So just ordinary repairs, that's not capital projects. Capital projects need to improve the value of your asset significantly, and needs to have a useful life of more than a year. So there are some things we can do in the Capital Projects Fund, some things we cannot. And again, they tell us here basically what you could do. And we then also have to meet the IRS guidelines. Little bit of definition there about what we cannot do. So salaries do not get paid out of the capital projects fund. And that's a piece of the conversation behind when we had our own in-house construction team, because when that team was brought on, gosh, Aaron and Veronica would probably be the only ones on this call that could tell us, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, as we were drawing down some debt dollars, we were using in-house staff to do some of that work. But by DESE standard, though their cost, even though that may or may not have been saving us money, could not be a part of the capital projects fund necessarily, depending upon the work they were doing. So again, per DESE, and this is really a piece of the conversation that we wanted to bring. Revenue, DESE also tells us by revenue type in the accounting manual where it goes when we get it. And so for capital projects fund, there are very few ways that you can put revenue into that fund. A lot of school districts, most school districts, 97, 98% of them, when they set that operating levy every year, they set a component of it in incidental, a component of it in teachers, and a component of it in capital projects fund. And what that does is allows a school district to have a good ongoing flow of revenue that allows for projects that are maybe more minor than those you might go out for a bond fund for. So schools need new playgrounds, schools need new windows, some things like that might be the kinds of things you would want to do. So you can set part of your tax rate in the capital projects fund. As you know, we do not do that, have not done it for many, many, many years. One of the reasons that we haven't, as I had conversation with Aaron and Veronica around this when I first got here, is that the way the current law reads, if we put money, when we set that 4.9599 each year, if we put 9.599 cents of that into capital projects fund, it says to our community, we're going to spend this only on capital projects. But what it does to our charter schools is the way the law is written, they don't get access to the local revenue on that 9.599. And so that would be kind of bad faith to separate that out at this point and put money in there. There are other ways to get it there, though. You can take the classroom trust or the basic foundation formula. We do not, of course, because we need that. Since we don't really get much of it, it doesn't really matter, but we would need that for operation. Bond sale proceeds go into there. Of course, we all know that. We also know that we've not had any for 40 years. Insurance recoupment for capital loss. So if we had a big windstorm, that money would go in there. If we total a vehicle, that money goes in there because a vehicle is a capital asset. You'll see when you look back at those revenue pages, we do have some insurance recovery money. So those would have gone into capital loss. And then if we sell an asset, anytime we sell one of our unused buildings, or anything like that, that money goes back into the capital assets fund. Basically, it has to go back to where it came from. The way that Kansas City Public Schools for many years has gotten money into capital projects fund, it's very common for schools, is via an interfund transfer. There's an allowable transfer at the end of each year that you can transfer into capital projects to do things with. A lot of school districts, when they have excess revenues over expenditures that they think are maybe kind of one time, or that's a great thing to do. And our district, we've done that for quite a while. For many years in the past, we've done that. And then you just see one other line. This is important because most of the standard ways of getting revenue into capital projects fund, we don't access currently. So this is a little peek at what Aaron and Veronica have worked on as we're looking at the capital projects fund only. So this is Fund 40, just our capital projects fund. I wanted to show you the lines of revenue that we've historically been using for this revenue source, because we do need some monies in capital projects fund. Things do happen and we have to plan, we have to put some resources in there. We also have debt that is paid out of the capital projects fund on those operating leases. We have to have a funding source for that debt. So this is not money that really gives us access to projects. This is money that we put in here in order to make that principal and interest payment on those energy leases and some of those other debt instruments that the district has utilized in recent years. So the largest source of our revenue comes from merchants and manufacturers surtax. You can see that. And this tells you, this is one of those weird lines when you're budgeting for revenue. It's kind of unreliable. You can see where we started as budget. We tend to budget this line equal to the current year. This year, it's coming in a couple of $1 million higher. So we're saying, well, that's probably going to be the case again. The other place where you'll see revenues commonly allocated, earnings by deposits are supposed to be separated out. If you have investments that relate specifically to money in capital projects, you're supposed to put the interest in there. So you can see we're doing that. And then down here on this line, this is where the sale of 1211 McGee. So again, that rule that if it came out of capital projects, the revenues need to go back into capital projects. So we just wanted to show this. Another large line, E-rate when you have it, depending on what you have it for. So E-rate is the federal program that helps us with technology. It started back in the day to help make sure that internet was accessible and that in schools, it's been expanded over the years to allow you to do other things. In next year, we're projecting in the budget right at $1.9 million. That's a reimbursement for what we're spending this year on the Yellow Dog contract that you guys approved during the budget process this last year. So that money has gone out. It's going to come back in to replenish this fund. So all in all, because this comes out and this comes in, we're projecting a little more money in capital projects fund next year. The bulk of it will be needed for those principal and interest, those annual principal and interest payments we have that come out of that account or out of that fund. Here I'm just explaining to you kind of what that is so that you know, but there are a lot of times in Missouri law where exemptions come to property taxes, and when they do, they tend to give you a way to recoup that in some manner. There's a recoupment component of the property tax rate that relates to when multifamily housing was moved out of residential into commercial, and so it reduced its tax rate. This is another way that they help us with that. So commercial real estate years ago was moved and it eliminated access to that merchant manufacturer inventory tax. So this is the tax they put in its place. So we're going to be kind of, unless we have a transfer into capital projects fund, we really do not have a revenue stream that allows us to do much in that area in the way of work. So when we do have revenues greater than expenditures or one-time kind of monies that come to us, that's a great way for us to access resources to do some of this work. This year when we sold this building, you gave us some allocation that's letting us do some projects now. We didn't ask for all of it, but we will be looking at bringing some project proposals forward as a part of this budget that are a good use of those monies that we have left. So we're really at the end of what we've prepared for you tonight. But just the next steps, what happens from here. We are working right now with department leaders on the request. Dr. Bedell issued a request yesterday that our budget managers look back at their budgets, thinking of both where we are in the economy and where we are with COVID-19, to ask budget managers to go back and reconsider a reduction to travel and food expenditures. Really pleased with how our leaders are responding to that. Aaron and Veronica shared several with me today that they're getting back, and people are trying to be diligent and serious about looking to reduce food and travel as a part of their budget. And then we're just going to have to start paring away at some of those requests. We want people to request what they think we need, defend it. We've had one leader come to cabinet and defend a request for some changes that comes with a little bit of money. But then at the end of the day, it's our job before we bring this budget back to you to get the superintendent satisfied that the things we're requesting are appropriate and sustainable long-term for the school district. So that's the work we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks. As you know, the public hearing will be on May 13th, just before your regular meeting. It'll start at 6 o'clock. We'll share a very brief presentation of these final revenue projections and our administrative recommendations. Then you'll have the opportunity to hear public comment. Kelly and Joe are getting set up to make sure that we have a good, efficient way along with June to receive that comment, make sure that everyone who wants to be heard, that we're prepared for that and we hear them. That'll be your last chance to kind of consider those recommendations that we're bringing forward, give us some feedback, and then we'll get busy preparing that final budget document for you. And when I say we, I mean Aaron and Veronica and their team mostly. And then we've saved that June 24th date in the event that on May 27th, we're not ready quite to get to a final doc. Any questions? Information overload?
Questions, folks?
No, felt like a lot was asked throughout, but we are definitely here to answer any more. Remember, this is a process. As Linda stated, it gives you all an opportunity to kind of go through. And if there's questions that you have, and keep in mind, like as I've stated before, we're going to be very conservative. So there aren't, in my opinion, going to be any significant asks. I mean, the big thing that Linda talked about is just making sure that we're ready for this digital world that we all have to embrace. I think there'll be a lot in that area. And as we continue to monitor the additional funds that are coming in, you know, what we shared with you before, the additional pre-K seats as options, the newcomer center that we've been talking about for the last couple of years over at Woodland, and then the conversations around looking at that early college model, and if that could, you know, grow out to a 9 to 12, if that's able to happen. But, you know, and then, of course, the capital works projects that we need to continue to engage in. But I don't, like I said, expect anything significant to be a part of adding on, just because we have to be conservative here.
So I think, just from my perspective, this was really good. Thank you for Linda, your team, really the entire team, right? Because this was a collaboration between, you know, finance and operations and academic side of things and HR, et cetera. So thank you for this. It felt a lot better for me this year than last year, but that has nothing to do with you guys. I think that's, you know, being a new school board member last year, right? And just trying to wrap your head around everything. And then, oh, by the way, you got to approve this budget that you're not super familiar with. I think the only sort of ask, and well, maybe it's not so much of an ask, because I see on your May 13th date, you talk about the administrative spending priorities. I think that will be really interesting to sort of dive into after that meeting. And I know that, Dr. Bedell, you mentioned, you know, not a whole lot of extra sort of spending. I would suggest that on the marketing front, and this won't surprise you guys, is that it was already in a lot of our views a priority, and there was a sense of urgency around it. I think it's actually even more so now. But that's, you know, something that we can discuss as you guys go figure out what your spending priorities will be.
Yeah, I think you guys will get all of that stuff in detail. There's a 100% commitment around that marketing piece. I think we've heard the board loud and clear on that over the last several months. So that all of that will be in the detail when we come back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Bedell, my only comment is, and I think that you will probably affirm this, is that when you come back with these recommendations, you're going to show clearly how those recommendations align with our strategic plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that we can understand fully where we're meeting and how we're continuing to support the strategic plan, as well as our equity priorities that we have articulated within the strategic plan, and the understanding of how we want to. I think the tier model is one demonstration of how we're trying to align resources where the need is greatest.
That's correct.
Okay.
So I want to, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I appreciate kind of the methodical process. One of the questions that I will have does not need to be addressed tonight, is how we can understand within the budget where our flexibility points will be in the event that we are not able to convene in-person classes or we have to go to some kind of substantially modified approach to have our kids in and out, and how that impacts both revenue and expenses. So, I mean, I think those are the questions that the public is going to expect us to be able to maybe not answer, but articulate what our process will look like to approach that.
Thank you. Yeah, we would definitely.
Are there other board members, comments, requests, questions about what you've seen so far?
Is there one on mute?
Mr. Barca, is there any comments you want to make regarding just the public budget hearing and just any statements you want to give regarding the public component for input?
Sure. I just wanted to, again, reiterate Nate's comments about thanking all of the staff to put all this stuff together. I know it's been crazy with the state budget changing and many different components kind of as a moving target. So, and then also around the communications component, I know this meeting was advertised through several mediums and shared by board members and our social media accounts. So I think we keep doing that for the public comment section, and hopefully we'll get some good input from them.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, Dr. Bedell, if you have no additional comments, we've met our purpose, which is this budget workshop. If there's no final comments, then I would adjourn this meeting. Are you
ready? I think some of us are ready to eat, so absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. With this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.